Welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Aurum, I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please check below to see if you've subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and just allows our stories to pop up on your feed more often. Through the neural interface of his ship, Paco felt every shard of ice floating past Pluto's dark surface. His consciousness extended through the vessel's sensor array, giving him a perfect spherical awareness that no physical eyes could match. Where a window would have been pointlessly limiting, the interface let him experience space in its true vastness. Every radiation wave and magnetic field as clear as color. The ship itself was small, barely larger than the transport pods used by the Karanok for short-range flights. Its silver-white hull curved in organic shapes that mimicked the flowing architecture of his people, though now its once pristine surface bore the scars of his long journey. No external lights marred its surface. They weren't needed when the pilot could feel every micrometeorite impact and temperature variation through the direct neural connection. Paco himself sat suspended in the ship's central chamber, his slender frame floating in the suspension gel that protected him during high-G maneuvers. His pale blue skin, evolved for the dim light of his homeworld's binary stars, seemed almost luminescent in the soft glow of the life support systems. His two slender arms drifted with the gentle currents of the gel, each ending in delicate fingers adapted for precision work. Unlike the massive, fur-covered Karanok who had enslaved his people, Cenarians had evolved for perception and agility rather than brute strength. The first signs of humanity's presence appeared in his sensor feed, ancient mining operations on Pluto's surface that put the finest Cenarian engineering to shame. Geometric patterns stretched across the dwarf planet's icy plains, their purpose unclear but their coordination undeniable. Paco recorded everything, each detail feeding into his ship's memory through the neural link, though the effort made his head throb. The interface wasn't meant for such extended use, but he couldn't risk missing anything that might help save his people. As he crossed Neptune's orbit, more evidence accumulated. Automated drones, so advanced they nearly escaped his notice, maintained vast arrays of scientific equipment in the ice giant's upper atmosphere. They ignored his presence completely, focused on tasks whose purpose he couldn't begin to guess. Around Uranus, he found similar machines, their movements suggesting they'd been performing their duties without interruption for centuries. Saturn's rings held structures that defied his understanding, gossamer thin sheets of material that seemed to harvest energy from the planet's magnetic field. They stretched for thousands of kilometers, yet had less mass than a single Cenarian vessel. Jupiter's massive radiation belts contained networks of satellites that appeared to be conducting experiments on a planetary scale. The Mars colonies struck him the hardest. Here, at last, were clear signs of habitation, or rather, abandonment. Vast cities stood empty under the red sky, their architecture unlike anything in his species' database. They showed no signs of warfare or disaster. They had simply been left behind, preserved like museum pieces by automated systems that continued their work for centuries, if not millennia. Hope began to fade in Paco's heart. He'd crossed half the galaxy chasing stories of humanity's power and benevolence, tales of a species that stood above all others, yet used their might to protect the weak. Every spacefaring race knew the legends, how humans had ended wars between elder species, uplifted young civilizations, and maintained a peace that spanned thousands of light years. But where were they now, when his people needed them most? Earth appeared in his sensor range, a blue jewel that stopped his hearts entirely. The cradle of humanity gleamed with pristine beauty, its atmosphere clearer than any inhabited world he'd ever seen. But as his ship drew closer, despair replaced his awe. No orbital stations cluttered the space around the planet. No ships moved between Earth and its moon. The only artificial structures he could detect were weather control satellites and what appeared to be wildlife monitoring systems. Humanity's homeworld had become a nature preserve, protected and maintained, but no longer inhabited. Paco's despair transmitted through the neural interface, causing his ship to drift slightly off course. The Karanok would continue their expansion. His people would remain enslaved. The last hope of the Cenarian race had led him to an empty... Space rippled. The first ship appeared directly ahead, its stealth field dissolving like fog in sunlight. Another materialized to his right, then his left, then above, below, behind. Within seconds, thousands of vessels surrounded him, their weapon signatures lighting up his sensor feed like a stellar nursery. "You have entered protected space." The voice bypassed his ship's communication array, speaking directly into his mind through the neural interface. "I am Sigma. Identify yourself and state your purpose, or you will be eliminated." Through the interface, Paco could feel the targeting systems of every ship locked onto his position. Each one could vaporize him before his neural impulses could even register the shot. The weapons alone spoke of technology centuries beyond his people's capabilities. I am Paco, of the Cenarian people," he managed, his thoughts carrying his voice. "I seek humanity's help. Please, the Karanok..." "Your species is unknown to us," Sigma interrupted. "And this sector is explicitly restricted from all non-human traffic. The consequences for violation are absolute." More ships appeared, filling every possible escape vector. Paco's terror transmitted through the interface, causing his small vessel to tremble slightly in space. The neural connection that made his ship feel like an extension of his body now ensured he could feel death approaching from every direction. "Please," he tried again, pushing his desperation through the link. "My people are dying. We heard the stories. Everyone has, about how humanity helps those in need, about their ancient power." His ship drifted closer to Earth, though he hadn't intended to move. "We didn't know where else to turn." There was a pause, during which Paco felt the weight of calculation beyond his comprehension. The ships hung in space like suspended stars, their presence both beautiful and terrifying. "Your neural patterns indicate truth," Sigma announced finally. "However, entering this space was still a violation. If you cannot provide a compelling reason for your presence here, the default response is termination." Through the neural link, Paco transmitted images. Massive, brown-furred Karanok warriors, twice the size of his people. Plasma weapons that cut through their best defenses like paper. Orbital bombardments that turned cities to glass. His homeworld conquered. Millions dead or enslaved. "The stories say humanity protects the weak, at least their homeworlds," he said softly. "That they're the apex predators of the galaxy, but they use their power to help others. Please, are they still here? Can they still help us?" Another pause, longer this time. The weapons remained locked on him, but Paco sensed a shift in Sigma's attention. The AI was processing something vast, consulting protocols or databases beyond Paco's understanding. "Your reason is noted," Sigma said finally, "and your neural patterns continue to read as truthful. However, you misunderstand the situation. Earth is not humanity's current residence. It is a preserve, protected in perpetuity as the cradle of their species." Paco's heart nearly stopped. "Then they're gone? Extinct?" The response came with what felt almost like amusement. "No, humanity is very much alive. They simply no longer require physical planets for habitation." A new sensation filtered through the neural link. Curiosity, perhaps? Would you like to meet them? The question hung in space like a lifeline. Paco's neural interface transmitted his mix of fear and hope, causing his ship to drift minutely forward before the automated systems corrected its position. The fleet of ships surrounding him remained perfectly still, their weapon signatures unwavering. "Yes," he whispered through the link, his mental voice conveying both his desperation and his wonder. "Please." The vast consciousness that was Sigma seemed to expand through the neural interface, its presence filling Paco's awareness like an ocean compared to his small pond. The sensation wasn't invasive. Rather, it felt like being granted access to a greater space, as though a door had opened to a room he hadn't known existed. "Your ship's neural interface is primitive," Sigma observed, "but compatible enough for basic communication. I will assign a subconsciousness to guide you. Maintain your current position." The weapon lock from the surrounding ships disappeared, though they remained in formation. Through his sensor array, Paco watched as they began to shift, creating a corridor in space that pointed away from Earth. A new presence touched his mind, gentler than Sigma's vast awareness. The promised subconsciousness, he realized. "This way," it guided, and Paco felt his ship respond almost without his input. The neural interface translated the AI's direction into pure intuition, making the complex series of burns and course corrections feel as natural as walking. They accelerated away from Earth's orbit, passing through the fleet like fish through a school of much larger predators. "Where are we going?" Paco asked, watching Earth's blue sphere diminish behind them. "Where do humans live if not on planets?" "Humans exist primarily in simulated worlds of their own creation," the subconsciousness explained. Its voice transmitted subtle harmonics that Sigma's hadn't, making it feel more personal somehow. "Their physical bodies are preserved in stations orbiting red dwarf stars, where the stellar life cycle provides the most stable long-term energy source." The concept staggered Paco. "They abandoned their bodies?" "No." Amusement colored the response. "They maintain their physical forms and occasionally return to them for various purposes: creation of new technologies, defense of protected spaces, aid to allied species." A pause. "And also reproduction. Humans prefer to raise their young in the real world, though they have long since mastered virtualization of consciousness and artificial gestation." They were accelerating faster now, far faster than Paco's ship should have been capable of. Through the neural interface, he sensed subtle modifications being made to his vessel's systems, optimizing them beyond their design specifications. The stars began to shift as they achieved velocities that would have been suicidal without the AI's guidance. "Why maintain physical bodies at all?" Paco asked, fascinated despite his underlying fear and urgency. "If their simulated worlds are so perfect." "Humans believe that maintaining connection to their physical origins is crucial to maintaining their humanity," the subconsciousness replied. "They don't want to lose their connection to biological life, and believe they cannot truly understand or protect it without remaining part of it themselves." The journey continued in silence for a time as Paco absorbed this. His sensor array, enhanced by whatever modifications the AI had made, showed him wonders he could barely comprehend. Vast networks of automated systems maintained the space between worlds. Clouds of nanomachines refined asteroids into pure elements. Entire comets were shepherded into new orbits for purposes he couldn't begin to guess. "There are 3 primary reasons humans choose to wake physically," the subconsciousness continued, apparently sensing his curiosity and his need for a more detailed explanation. "First, when they wish to create something new, they believe physical interaction with reality provides inspiration that simulation cannot fully replace. Second, when warrior species violate protected spaces and require direct intervention. And third, when allied species require aid that cannot be provided through automated systems alone." Paco's heart beat faster. And which category does my request fall into? That remains to be determined, the AI replied. But Sigma has judged your case worthy of human attention. That alone is significant. When Sigma finished, a new star was growing in Paco's sensor feed. A dim red dwarf, barely bright enough to be visible to organic eyes. But around it orbited structures that defied comprehension. Stations larger than cities spread in geometric patterns that seemed hard to believe could exist. Energy patterns were transmitted between them in ways that might have been communication or might have been art. "Human bodies are preserved here?" he asked, his voice small in his own mind. "Some of them, those who wished to remain closer to Earth. Others chose stations around different stars, spreading themselves through the galaxy." The subconsciousness guided his ship toward one of the smaller structures, though smaller was relative, as it was still larger than any space station Paco had ever seen. "Sigma has arranged for you to meet with one human who recently chose physical awakening." "Recently?" The word caught in Paco's thoughts. "How long do humans usually stay awakened?" "It varies. Some maintain physical form for years when working on complex projects. Others wake only briefly to handle specific situations. The one you will meet has been physical for approximately 3 Earth months, overseeing the development of new biological preservation protocols for Earth." They were close enough now that Paco could see the station's surface in detail. What had appeared solid from a distance revealed itself as a constantly shifting maze of geometric shapes, the entire structure reorganizing itself moment by moment. His ship approached what seemed to be a docking bay, though it looked nothing like any he'd seen before. "I will need to adjust your neural interface," the subconsciousness informed him. "The station's environment is optimized for human biology, but compatible with your own. However, you will need enhanced processing capacity to interact with its systems." Paco felt the changes begin, subtle at first, then building in complexity. The neural interface expanded, granting him awareness of systems within systems, layers of reality he hadn't known existed. The station wasn't just reorganizing itself, he realized. It was alive in its own way, constantly evolving to meet the needs of its inhabitants. "Are you ready?" the subconsciousness asked as the docking bay opened before them, its walls flowing like liquid metal. Paco checked his ship's readings one final time, more from habit than necessity. "Yes," he said, and felt the truth of it in his mind. "I am ready to meet a human." As he conveyed those words, the docking bay swallowed Paco's ship like a living thing, its walls flowing around the vessel in patterns that seemed to defy physics. Through his enhanced neural interface, he could sense layer upon layer of security systems scanning every part of his ship's structure. The station's awareness felt different from both Sigma and the subconsciousness, less personal, more architectural, as though the entire structure was a single vast machine dedicated to maintaining optimal conditions for its inhabitants. "Your vessel will be held in suspension," the subconsciousness informed him as the liquid metal walls completed their embrace of his ship. "You may disconnect from the neural interface. The station will provide direct environmental support." Disconnecting felt like losing a sense he'd always had. The suspension gel drained from his chamber, leaving him feeling vulnerable and small. Without the interface, he was just himself again. A slender, blue-skinned being far from home, about to meet a creature out of legend. The walls of his ship dissolved, or perhaps folded away. His perception couldn't quite parse the geometry of it. He found himself standing in a corridor that seemed to breathe, its surfaces moving with subtle patterns that might have been art or might have been information. The air was perfect, neither warm nor cool, with just the right mixture of gases for his biology. A humanoid figure waited at the end of the corridor. At first, Paco thought it must be another AI construct, its silver-white surface reflecting the corridor's patterns. But as he approached, he realized it was a robot, its form clearly designed to approximate human proportions while remaining obviously artificial. "I am Sigma's physical avatar," the robot said, its voice matching the vast presence he'd first encountered near Earth. "I will guide you to the meeting chamber. The human you will meet is called Matthew." Paco followed the avatar, trying not to stare at everything at once. The corridor opened into larger spaces, each more incredible than the last. In one chamber, he saw what appeared to be artificial wombs, each containing a developing human child. In another, complex machinery wove what might have been new bodies, though the purpose of the process wasn't clear to his understanding. "As I said before, humans prefer to raise their children physically," Sigma explained, noticing his attention. "The first few years of human development occur in biological form, before they are given access to simulated spaces. It helps maintain their connection to their original nature." They passed through a security checkpoint that existed more in probability than physical space. Paco felt the station systems analyzing him on micron levels, verifying his identity and intentions through methods that made his perception spin. The architecture grew more organic, with surfaces that mimicked natural materials while retaining their fluid technological nature. "Why are there so few physical humans?" Paco asked, noting the empty chambers they passed. "In a station this size." "Most of the space is dedicated to support systems, backup facilities, and emergency protocols," Sigma replied. "Humans learned long ago that concentrated population centers create unnecessary vulnerabilities. They spread themselves across many stations, many stars. It makes them virtually impossible to threaten as a species. If you attack one, the others will awaken." The concept struck Paco with sudden force. His people had built cities, collected themselves as easy targets for the Karanok's weapons. Humanity had evolved beyond such weaknesses, becoming as distributed and resilient as the AIs that served them. They entered what appeared to be a garden, though none of the plants were species Paco recognized. The air here had a different quality, still perfectly breathable, but carrying scents that triggered profound responses in his biology. He felt simultaneously more alert and more at peace. "Matthew designed this space," Sigma said. "He believes that organic beings communicate best in organic settings. The plants are from Earth's prehistoric periods, recreated to match fossil records." The garden opened into a wider chamber that seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially elsewhere. Its boundaries were suggestions rather than limits, and at its center stood a simple wooden table that was possibly the least artificial thing Paco had seen in the station, precisely because of how natural it appeared. "He will join us shortly," Sigma said, gesturing to one of the chairs. "He is completing something he calls a morning routine, though such temporal distinctions are largely arbitrary here." Paco sat, his enhanced perception taking in every detail of the space. The wooden table reminded him of a simplicity that made the space feel more welcoming and real. The air currents in the room flowed naturally, and even the light seemed carefully crafted, its spectrum optimized for both human and Cenarian vision. Soon, a new presence touched Paco's awareness. Not vast like Sigma, not architectural like the station, but deep and complex in ways he couldn't quite grasp. He turned toward the garden entrance as footsteps approached, his heart racing in anticipation and fear. The human who entered looked both exactly and nothing like what Paco had expected. Matthew appeared to be male, with features that somehow managed to seem both young and ancient simultaneously. He wore simple clothing that might have been grown rather than manufactured, and he moved with a grace that suggested complete mastery of his physical form. But it was his eyes that caught Paco's attention. They held knowledge accumulated over centuries of existence, compassion born from an understanding of both biological and digital life, and power so effortlessly contained that it felt more like a force of nature than a living being or a machine. "Welcome, Paco of the Cenarians," Matthew said, his voice carrying a tone that Paco's perception recognized as utter confidence. "Sigma tells me your people need our help." Matthew sat across from Paco with a fluid grace that made the simple motion look a tier above the rest. The prehistoric garden around them seemed to respond to his presence, its alien flowers turning subtly toward him like satellites orienting to a star. Through his perception, Paco could sense layers of technology so advanced they appeared magical. Matthew's biological form was clearly augmented far beyond anything Paco had imagined possible, yet it all appeared perfectly natural. "Please," Matthew said, gesturing with one hand. "Tell me about your situation. Sigma has shared the broad strokes, but I'd like to hear it from you directly." Paco's throat felt tight, but he forced himself to speak. "The Karanok invaded our systems 3 standard years ago. They—" His voice caught as memories surfaced. Cities burning, orbital bombardments turning the surface of his homeworld to glass. "They're stronger than us, more advanced. We tried to fight, but they—" He trailed off, unable to continue. "Show me," Matthew said gently. "Your neural enhancement can share the memories directly." The images flowed from Paco's mind without effort. Massive, brown-furred warriors twice the size of his people, orbital stations falling from the sky in flames, millions fleeing into emergency shelters that proved useless against the Karanok's bunker-piercing weapons, the systematic destruction of everything his people had built. Matthew absorbed it all without visible reaction, though the garden's atmosphere subtly shifted, its patterns becoming more complex. "I see," he said finally. "And you came seeking us because of the stories?" "Everyone knows the legends," Paco replied. "How humanity reached the peak of evolution, how you stopped wars between elder species, uplifted younger ones. Some say you're gods. Others say you're the universe's immune system, defending life itself." He looked down at his hands. "We didn't know where else to turn." "We're not gods," Matthew said, amusement coloring his voice. "We simply reached our potential earlier than most species, and learned some hard lessons about power along the way." He stood, moving to a point where the garden's boundaries seemed to fold into higher dimensions. "Walk with me?" Paco followed, noticing how the station's architecture flowed around them, creating paths moment by moment. "Are you an admiral?" he asked. "A military leader?" Matthew laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "I've been an admiral, yes, thousands of years ago. I've been many things. Right now, I'm simply Matthew, and I'm happy to help." He turned to face Paco directly. "We'll free your homeworld, of course. The only question is how to do it most effectively." The casual certainty in his voice made Paco's heart skip. Just like that? You'll help us?" "Of course." Matthew's expression grew serious. "The Karanok have violated several principles we work to maintain, using overwhelming force against a weaker species. We don't interfere in wars, but homeworld invasions are not allowed by our laws." His eyes seemed to look through multiple dimensions at once. "They need to learn that such actions have consequences." As they walked, they emerged into what appeared to be a control center, though it bore no resemblance to any Paco had seen. The walls were transparent from the inside, showing the red dwarf star and its complex array of stations. Information flowed through the air itself, visible to Paco's interface as intricate patterns of light and probability. "We'll take your ship," Matthew said, surprising him. "It's been upgraded considerably since you arrived, and it will serve our purposes better than one of ours. The Karanok should see who brought us to them." "But—" Paco looked around at the vast station, the incredible technology on display. Wouldn't a human vessel be more powerful? Matthew's smile carried echoes of ancient wisdom. Just because we won't travel in a human ship doesn't mean I won't take one with us to your planet. He gestured, and a path appeared, leading back toward the docking bay. Shall we? The journey back through the station felt different with Matthew present. The architecture responded to him as he walked, spaces opening before them and sealing behind them. Other robots, or possibly avatars, bowed slightly as they passed, their movements carrying subtle meanings Paco's enhanced perception could almost grasp. They reached Paco's ship, its humble form now somehow strange. The modifications Sigma had made were invisible to normal sight, but to his interface, the vessel practically screamed with new potential. The connection had been upgraded far beyond its original specifications, and systems he didn't even have names for had been integrated into its structure. "Your people built this well," Matthew commented, running a hand along the ship's hull. "The neural interface design is elegant. We simply helped it reach its full potential." The docking bay opened to space, its liquid metal walls flowing aside like curtains. The red dwarf's light painted everything in its light, making the station seem to burn with inner fire. Paco felt a moment of pure awe, realizing he was about to travel with a being out of legend. "Will you fit?" he asked suddenly, remembering the ship's small size. Matthew laughed again. "Don't worry about that. I don't need to stand." He gestured toward the entrance. "After you?" Paco stepped into his ship and stopped, staring. The interior had been completely transformed. The neural interface beckoned to him, promising capabilities he had only begun to explore. "Reality," Matthew said from behind him, "is far more flexible than most species imagine. Shall we go help your people?" Paco moved to the pilot's position, feeling the enhanced neural interface embrace his consciousness like an old friend. Through it, he could sense Matthew's presence, vast and complex, yet contained. The ship responded to them both as the propulsion system started. "Yes," Paco said, his voice firm for the first time since he'd begun his desperate journey. "Let's go home." The journey back to Cenarian space took far less time than Paco's desperate flight had, though he couldn't quite grasp how the ship managed it. Space itself flexed around them, distances folding in ways his mind struggled to comprehend even with the neural interface's improvements. Matthew sat in quiet meditation for most of the trip, his presence a calm center in the storm of physics-defying travel. They emerged from the final spatial fold above Paco's homeworld. The sight struck him like a physical blow. Where once towers had reached toward the binary stars, now only ruins remained. The Karanok had transformed the planet's major cities into military outposts, their brutal architecture hawking the flowing designs of Cenarian construction. Through the enhanced sensors, Paco could detect his people living in crowded refugee camps between the destroyed cities. "There," he said, indicating a particularly large Karanok installation near what had been his home village. "That's the primary command center for this region. The local overseer coordinates slave labor from there." Matthew opened his eyes, studying the scene with calm interest. 10 Karanok warriors in the immediate area, he noted. "Would you like to watch how we handle this sort of situation?" Before Paco could respond, the ship suddenly descended through the atmosphere. No alarms sounded, no defense systems activated. They might as well have been invisible. They landed in what had once been the village square, now transformed into a training ground for Karanok troops. The massive fur-covered aliens didn't notice their arrival at first. The ship's stealth systems, Paco realized, must have been operating on levels far beyond normal technology. He watched through the neural interface as Matthew stood, his movements still carrying that strange grace that seemed to contain his true power. "Stay here," Matthew said kindly. Watch and understand why we choose to maintain physical forms. The ship's entrance opened, and Matthew stepped out into Paco's planet. He looked absurdly small compared to the Karanok warriors, each of whom stood nearly twice his height. Their brown fur and massive builds made them look bigger and more threatening than Matthew. One of the Karanok finally noticed the human's presence. He shouted an alarm in their harsh language, raising a plasma rifle that could have vaporized a Cenarian instantly. The other warriors responded immediately, weapons appearing in massive hands as they moved to surround the apparent intruder. Matthew spoke, his voice carrying effortlessly across the square. Your species has violated several principles we maintain. You will withdraw from Cenarian space immediately. The Karanok overseer emerged from the command center, his ceremonial armor gleaming. He towered over his warriors, a mountain of muscle and weaponry.
Who dares?
He began, then stopped as he got a clear look at Matthew. Something like recognition flickered across his ursine features.
Who are you?
I am human, Matthew said simply. You have one opportunity to withdraw peacefully. The overseer's response was to fire his weapon, a shoulder-mounted cannon that could punch through starship hull plating. The blast crossed the distance between them instantly. Matthew wasn't there. Paco's augmented perception could barely track the human's movement, even with the help of his ship's sensors. One moment he stood calmly facing the Karanok. The next, he was beside their leader, moving with a speed that made light seem sluggish. His hand touched the overseer's armor almost gently. The massive alien collapsed, his nervous system shut down by technologies Paco couldn't begin to understand. The other warriors opened fire, filling the air with enough plasma to melt a small building. Matthew flowed between the blasts like water between stones, each movement elegant. He touched another warrior who fell, then another, and another. In less than 10 seconds, all 10 Karanok lay unconscious in the dust. As I said, Matthew stated calmly, looking down at their fallen overseer, you will withdraw from Cenarian space. He pressed his palm to the alien's forehead, interfacing directly with its neural implants. Your entire species will understand the consequences of violating our principles. The message is being transmitted now. Through his ship's sensors, Paco watched in awe as FTL communications rippled out from the fallen Karanok, carrying Matthew's warning to every member of their species. The message contained not just words, but complete sensory data of what had just occurred, and the clear understanding that this had been the gentlest possible demonstration of human power. How? Paco's voice failed him. You didn't even use weapons. Matthew walked back to the ship, his movements still carrying that impossible grace. These were just some nanites, he said casually. Don't worry about it. And this was just the beginning. I see about 400 more Karanok positions that need to be addressed. From high above, a shadow suddenly fell over the village square. Paco's ship detected something massive decloaking in orbit, a ship so large it turned day to night with its presence. More shapes began appearing in the sky, smaller but still impressive. Thousands of autonomous drones and combat platforms, their designs unlike anything Paco had ever seen. Matthew smiled slightly at Paco's awe. I didn't even need to use the automated forces or drones for this small group, but for a full planetary liberation? He gestured at the gathering armada above. We should probably make use of all our tools. The next 5 hours passed in a blur as Paco witnessed a display of overwhelming force. Matthew coordinated the fleet with casual gestures, each movement triggering cascades of military action across the planet. Karanok strongholds faced simultaneous assault from forces that ignored their best defenses. Orbital platforms that had bombarded Cenarian cities were disabled by drones that seemed to materialize inside their shield perimeters. Ground forces found their weapons transformed into inert metal by clouds of nanites. Through it all, Matthew maintained that same impossible calm, as though he were conducting a simple cleaning job rather than the liberation of an entire species. "Your people can begin returning to their homes," he told Paco as another Karanok fortress surrendered. "The nanites are already beginning reconstruction of damaged infrastructure." When the Karanok leadership finally requested terms, they did so with a mixture of terror and awe that Paco understood all too well. Their chief commander, a massive warrior whose ceremonial armor now bore scars from human weapon systems, could barely look at Matthew as they met on neutral ground. "You will withdraw from all Cenarian territories," Matthew stated simply. It wasn't a demand or a threat, merely a statement of fact. "You will provide reparations for the damage caused, according to terms my automated systems are transmitting now. You will never again attempt conquest of another species." The Karanok chief snarled, his species' pride warring with his new understanding of the galaxy's true power structure.
And if we refuse?
Matthew's smile contained no humor. "Then I stop holding back. What you've witnessed today was accomplished without involving actual human military forces. Would you like me to show you what happens when we decide to fight seriously?" The chief's fur bristled, but his next words emerged as a desperate whisper.
You mean this wasn't your military?
"No," Matthew said simply. "This was a diplomatic response, a simple correction of unacceptable behavior." He gestured at the fleet of autonomous ships still visible in orbit. "These are maintenance units, not warships. Please don't make me demonstrate the difference." The surrender took effect immediately. Within hours, Karanok forces began withdrawing from every part of Cenarian space they had conquered. Automated human systems followed their retreat, ensuring compliance while simultaneously beginning the reconstruction of Cenarian civilization. Paco watched his people emerging from hiding, their faces showing the same mixture of disbelief and hope he felt in his own heart. "I don't know how to thank you," he said to Matthew. "Build something amazing," Matthew replied. "That's how you thank us. Create art, music, science. Show us that we made the right choice in helping you." He smiled, and for a moment, Paco glimpsed the profound age behind his eyes. "That's what we protect, you see. Not just life, but the potential for life to become wonderful." As Matthew prepared to depart, the Karanok chief approached Paco with an awkward formality. Both of them watched the human's ship rise into orbit, where it would soon return him to his station around the red dwarf star. They stood in silence for a moment, former conqueror and former victim united in their new understanding of the galaxy's true order.
We didn't know,
The Karanok chief said finally.
the stories